KAIST is one of also the science and technology-based university in Korea, and I'm glad that we can work together and help UTEC to move forward in Uruguay. This is our main campus. Looks quite good, and I'll talk about how our KAIST has been helped the Korean economy to grow for the past few decades, and how KAIST has been structured and had a systems to work as one of the main drivers of economic growth in Korea, and especially the heart of the KAIST system is university and industry collaboration. So I'll talk about that in the later period of my presentation. And something in common between Korea and Uruguay, well, it's beautiful nature and surrounded by big countries like Brazil and Argentina, in China and Japan and Korea. And good leadership. I really like, we have a minister here, and we have a very good leadership in Uruguay too, and in Korea too. And we have a very talented people, as in Uruguay. Uruguay is like 1.7 larger than Korea, so we have like 100,000 kilometers, square kilometers of in size, and the USA is like 100 times bigger in the size perspective. And this is 1960s of Korea, and the right-hand side is 1915 these days. So after the Korean War in 1950, we really had nothing, even trees were burned out, and nothing to lean on in 60s. But in how many hours? Like 50 years after, the Korea has been took off. For example, 50 million people in 9 provinces. And we have about, let's say, 2,300 high schools and 188 four-year universities in Korea, with the same size of Uruguay, and like less than like 70% of the size. Quite many of the university and higher educations in Korea, and some of the statistics shows that shipbuilding volume is second largest. But the revenue perspective, profit perspective, the number 1 in the world. And average internet speed is number 1 in all over the world. And R&D funding per GDP is also number 1 in the world, beating the Israel. And the high school enrollment is 6th in the world. And number of international patents, 5th in the world. And number of science papers are 10th in the world, and GDP like 15th in the world. So from 60s of nothing, we've been kind of tried to move forward for the past few years, and we could achieve something in this time. And this is what we have been moving forward for the past few decades. These are, maybe I can show you this is the Korean track. Usually the GDP growth is quite parallel in most of the countries. It's very hard to leapfrog or increase faster than other country many times. And this is the Korean track, and this is the Korean changes of the GDP. Only 2 countries has been changed the ranking in GDP for the past few decades. This is the Ireland, and this is the South Korea. Unfortunately, Ireland has been growing because of the real estate investment. In 2008, because of the financial crisis, they dropped abruptly, and they no longer stay in high. So, like as it shows, Korea has been achieving quite a lot in many ways, and have been going upward in the GDP in global perspective. And this is the kind of a wealth-based national kind of a map. And you can see this, the size depends on the GDP of the nations. And this is Korea, and this is Japan, and this is China, and this is USA. So you can see some of the changes of the Korean economy for the past few decades. So many nations and many people try to and want to know what happened in Korea. And today's talk is about especially the hearts of this secret of economic growth that actually heavily depends on the human resource development. In the center of human resource development, KAIST was in the major organizations that actually drive the innovations. So let me introduce some of the things. So before that, so yeah, many of you know already, those marginal returns depending on the industrial portfolio, and many times developing country and developed country had a track in increasing their GDP from geographical resources, selling, and natural resources, and human resources, and then technological resources, and financial, and mostly the leadership is very important. So as you move forward to the right-hand track, your marginal return of the nations becomes larger and larger. So many of the developed countries located around this area. And Korea started from around here, and now we move to close around financial area. Especially when we move forward, the key of our transformation from the agricultural-based and very low developing country to developed country has been here the human resources. And this stepping stone to transform in more towards in the industrial country is very, very important, and that was really the major part of our transformations of Korean side. Especially in this transformation, KAIST has been doing quite important role, and I will talk about that in a few slides later. And this is just another example how this GDP per like R&D investment, especially for investment on human resources, are highly correlated in the perspective. And this is how our GDP has been growing for the past few decades. And if I share some of the few strategies that Korea has been stepped, we have been had a very strict economic plan for the past 30 years, 30 decades. Every 5 years, we established 5 years economic development plan, and that actually made our economy grow very, very fast. In this plan, major strategy was the innovation strategy, especially in first period of time, in early period of time, we focused on this more of a process innovation, more of a with a cheap labor, with a cheaper product try to produce, and closed innovations, more of a industry-based innovations, and eventually we move later on to open but closed innovations and more incremental innovations and applied innovations, and entrepreneurship, more large firm-based innovations, and national government-driven innovation policy has been the driving forces of Korean economic growth. And especially in this innovation strategy, focused on 5 major important industry. The first is steel industry. So we have a postcode, the second largest steel industry in the world. And electric industry, now the Samsung is one of the largest electric company in the world. Petrochemical industry, and the LG Chemical is one of the largest industry in the world. And machines and automobiles, Hyundai Automobiles is the largest, one of the largest automobile industry company in the world. Shipbuilding industry, the #1 in the world. So we focus on these 6 industry for the past 30 years, and many of our company became the world leading company for the past 2 decades. In focusing on these few focused industry, one of the hidden government support, especially what they especially heavily invested, was human resource development, especially higher educations in universities. And KAIST has been the major invested organizations to produce the high quality human resource, advanced human resource in science and technology to support the industry growth, those 6 industries in Korea. And from there, we actually transform our industry like this. From 60s, we are more of a very agricultural. And then 70s, the textile, and 80s, the automobiles and heavy. And then 90s, the semiconductor industry. So our GDP has been like this heavy capital-based industry has been growing very fast until now. And this agricultural and other industry has been fading out from our industry portfolio for the past few decades. And KAIST has been established in 1971 to support this transformation of a Korean industry and to produce the high quality human resource, especially to increase the country's, it is called absorptive capacity of advanced knowledge and to transform it into our company's industrial capability. And this is also another snapshot, how we changed our GDP from agriculture fading out, and services and manufacturing has been growing very fast. And also the employment share, the service and manufacturing. The services include other IT-related technologies cases. So the service also heavily rely on the innovation-based industries. So from these brief figures, we had a very successful transformation from agriculture to manufacturing industry and manufacturing to knowledge industry. It has been heavily depends on the focused industry development and also the fostering key technical human resources. And these technical human resources has been the hearts of the Korea's innovation strategy and policies. And in the perspective of then, in a more deeper way, what happened in innovation industry policy perspective, I will give a little more details. If you look at this graph, this is how our GDP share has been changing over the past few decades. And well, it's similar with the pictures. Our manufacturing sectors has been growing very, very fast for the past few decades, and agriculture and other services have been also, agriculture has been reducing, but service has been also growing together. So I'll just skip over part, especially the productivity perspective. The manufacturing industry's productivity has grown very fast, also, especially in that area. And this is more historical step forward perspective in the policy perspective. So our industry portfolio has been light industry and light heavy chemical in 80s and heavy chemical high-tech industry in 80s and 2000 knowledge intensive industry. The reason why I'm showing this transformation of a Korean industrial structure is that it is tightly linked with our science and technology policy and educational policy. So in 1960s, we established KIST and MOST. These two major R&D institutions now later merged into KAIST. Our institution has been established in 1971. So these two institutions were major kind of science and technology organizations in 60s, and we had a promotional act in 1976. These promotional acts later on evolved to also the KAIST, it is called national law. We have our own independent national law only for KAIST institutions. And in 70s, we established government research institutions in the field of chemical and heavy industry from the mid-70s. And 80s, we promoted private firms research institutes by reforming financial and tax incentive to stimulate R&D investment in the science and technology areas. So this kind of historical transformation of Korean industry actually also emphasize how important it is to have like UTEC types of science and technology institutions to push forward the transformation of the industrial structure of a nation. And this is one of the kind of hearts of Korean economic growth in many aspects. And especially R&D, public R&D sector's evolutions has been like 1980s, in early period of time. We focus on these internalizations of foreign technologies, and reverse engineering was the heart of our science and technology strategy. That role has been taken over, especially by KAIST, major research organizations. And our transformations and re-engineering has been also disseminated to other companies like Samsung and Hyundai. And those knowledge has been disseminated through the human resource who graduated from KAIST, and they become kind of leaders of those companies in nowadays. So if I a little bit summarize, the successful expansion of absorptive capacity through advanced higher education such as KAIST has been one of the key driving forces of transformations of Korean economy. And the early initiation of science and technology-based human resource has been the critical in developing and transforming the industry. So this might give some of the tips how important the UTEC is in the Uruguay economic growth in coming few decades, I think. And this will be getting more important in coming innovation-based economy from knowledge-based economy. Many people say that knowledge-based economy few decades ago. Now the new paradigm of innovation is heavily depends on how you can manage innovation as a country and create a new product and new industry growth you can create. And this actually emphasized the importance of UTEC in coming economic growth of Uruguay, in my perspective. And human resource perspective, well, I'll quite go faster. So historically, the Korean economic growth has been quite attributed above all the exploitation of capital and increasing educated labor. And this black line is intangible investment, and red line is tangible investment. So this graph shows that how this intangible investment majorly represent the human resource. So how we shifted our investment from the tangible to intangible, and this transformation actually has been the hearts of economic growth of Korean case. So the human resource development has been the key driving forces. And also, as coupled with this stepwise, our strategy and industrial policy, we also coupled our educational development. Like the KAIST institutions. So at first we established in the early period at KAIST, and then later on followed other systems of innovations, educations, and other private universities also transformed their roles, and KAIST also transformed their role depending on the development of our industrial stages. It is also quite important. And that this insight gives UTEC. When we plan the UTEC development schedule, we also have to couple with Uruguay's educational and industrial economic growth stages. And many times changing the structure and system of educational system is really very hard, sometimes impossible. So we have to plan ahead when we design a UTEC for like 10 years plan, and then after 10 years plan. So coupling with the national economic planning is very important to successfully manage the organization, especially educational organizations in a country. So that might give some of insight later on. More details we'll talk about tomorrow, I think. And this is like when we first started as our organization, we focused on the skill for catching up. Skill for catching up is like observing the knowledge of advanced companies like other countries like Japan and the US. But now we transform our system to skill for creativity and leaderships. So fortunately, we could change our structure and we could change our educational system to fit to our transformed agenda of nations and economy. And so throughout Korea's modern economic history, the adequate supply and mobilization of qualified labor, including human resource in science and technology, has been the foundation to industrial and science and technology policy in Korean side. So if I summarize what in a human resource perspective, driving forces of economic and industry growth largely based on high quality human resource, especially human resource development has been closely coupled with industry meetings and their needs and wants. And we also had a push strategy of establishing and fostering a selected leading institutions such as KAIST, which later took a major role of breakthrough innovation both in academia and industry. More detailed about what we did as a KAIST, I will talk a few slides later. So let's look at more inside of KAIST. Until now, we've been looking at from large macro picture, how KAIST has been doing human resource development, industry development, and we'll go deeper into the KAIST, what we actually, who we are and what we have been doing some of the introductions. So the KAIST established in 1971, and in 1984 we started the educational program more heavily, like undergraduate education program in 1984. In 1989, the KAIST has been renamed as a higher educational institutions, also merging other institutions. And we have like 2 different locations in Seoul and Daejeon. Daejeon is like 100 kilometers south from Seoul. And in Daejeon, we have 2 different campuses. One is like Gusong campus, the other one is like Munji campus. And this is our picture of campus. I don't know, the Uruguay is much beautiful, but our campuses also have some of a beauty of green things in Korea. Yeah, and so like 167, but it's closer in the southern part, and especially where the Daejeon, the KAIST located is called Daedok Innopolis. Like this area of high-tech park, we are surrounded by the many high-tech companies in Daejeon area. So Daejeon is called Daedok Innopolis, and this is an R&D specialized zone established in 1970 around when KAIST established. And 15% of our national R&D spending comes to this Daedok area. And 11% of our national PhD researchers are located in our area. And it is called more of a Korean Silicon Valley. And about 30 government research institutions is located, 5 universities, and we have like 48,000 patents in our area. And we have these are the many research institutions, and these are many the leading companies located surrounding KAIST. And just brief picture of our school is that we have about like 1,000 faculty members, and among them, tenure track is like 600, half of them. It's like similar size with MIT in the United States. And we have a more graduate student than undergraduate student. Because originally we started as a research institutions, later on we started undergraduate education. That's one of the KAIST difference in organizational development strategy. And then we have like 26 from the government funding and 41% from the research grant, including like private funding. And 33% are donations and other incomes that we have. So it's like mixed organizations, not only the public funding, we have a large private funding together. And the Asian University, well, ranking-wise, we are, just one thing is that because we have been established like less than 50 years, the Times statistics shows that the young university established less than 50 years. We are the 3rd ranking in the world, but the 2nd ranking and 4th ranking, they officially benchmarked KAIST about 40 years ago. So we are doing quite well in many ways in educational perspective. And so our graduate did quite significant role in the Korean economic growth and private sector's growth. It's like nearly 25% of the R&D personnel of Samsung, actually they are graduated from KAIST. And 20% of the all engineering doctorates in Korea are from KAIST. And KAIST graduate also hold 10% of all engineering professorship in Korea. So most of the university, 1 of 10 came from KAIST. So we are kind of a leading institutions in Korea as a in science and technology and engineering area. And you can see most of the graduate goes to industry side, 50% of our graduate. And we have like Pohang University is the Young University Times ranking number 3 and the number 2 last year. They officially benchmarked KAIST, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and Japanese Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, and Gwangju Institute of Science and Technology. They are all benchmarked KAIST officially, our systems, and they are all top 5 rankings in the World Times ranking in young universities. And if I look at some of the educational system and research, we have about 5 colleges. College of Natural Science, College of Life Science and Bioengineering, College of Engineering, College of Liberal Arts and Convergent Science, and College of Business. Within these colleges, we have schools called School of Social Science, School of Management and Engineering, and School of Mechanical Aerospace, School of Electrical Engineering, and School of Computing. This school is like within college, large department becomes school. So these are the school that we have. And yeah, these are the structures of our schools, maybe quite similar with some of your universities. But the thing is that our school heavily focus on engineering and science. So if you look at this graph, these are the social science and management. These are all science and technology. Personal perspective, like around almost 80% of our faculty members and faculty members are in engineering and science area, and 20% from management and liberal arts. In a student perspective, all of the students, they are in science and engineering, in undergraduate. Only like 10 to 15 students we accept as a management degree, but they have to do also dual degree in science and engineering. So all the students in KAIST, they are majoring in science and engineering. And maybe I'll talk about it later, but they are all supported by the government. So they receive a national scholarship, and they all receive living subsidies. So they all receive subsidy from the country. So if you once enter KAIST, you don't need to pay anything. You receive money until they graduate. And usually they come from the special high school called High School for Science and Math. We have each region one special high school for science and math. They are the high school that educate the talented students in science and math in each region. And 80% of our students comes from this special high school, and they enter KAIST in the second year of high school, even before they graduate. And only 20% comes from the general high school, but it's very competitive to enter, like in the entering ratio. So it's like nationally we fostering this key human resource in a science technology to drive the innovation in the industry side. That's the KAIST model of in Korea. And we have also the special research institutions called KAIST Institute. So we foster internal multidisciplinary collaboration in R&D. We have all different types of convergence, innovation, R&D activities. They are all supported by the internal R&D funding of universities. And also external funding, we also receive a lot of funding from the government too. So, and also we have, we also developed, it is called Education 3.0, new educational system. For the past few decades, what our experience says that in education, giving a lecture is not as effective as students involved doing their own projects and discussions. So we developed some interactive enhanced teaching and learning systems. So like many of our, more than 30%, almost 40% of our courses are being offered this 3.0 educational systems. In system, what we do is that we have lecture is being recorded as a video. And within the course, within the lecture time, the professor doesn't give lectures. So students, before they come to the class, they see the lecture first through the video. And then if they come to the class, then we actually, based on what they see, and we focus on our research project, or we focus on our discussion of the solution of the problems, and that actually kind of enhance their creative thinking and their communications and their kind of productivity in knowledge learning in that case. And this Education 3.0 has been featured in, I think, the internet doesn't work here, but it has been featured in Forbes magazine in the US, as a new paradigm of educational system in this area. And we also do many undergraduate research participation program, URP program. This URP program is also foster the undergraduate student involvement in the research and development, and this actually makes change their mindset of learning and increase their creativity as an engineer and scientist. This URP program also we quite share with the Olin College. Olin and we are kind of brother institutions, so we share a lot of common kind of attributes, including this URP programs, and also close collaboration with the industry. And one of the things that we invented like past few years, like it has been featured in Times magazine, is online electric vehicle project. This online electric vehicle project is that many electric vehicles have a battery inside it, and one of the handicap of electric vehicle is that the battery is heavy. So this battery makes the fuel efficiency and electrical efficiency to be very bad. So what we have been invented is that like infrared charging system from the bottom. So we actually put charging system on the road, like bus stop or the stations, and we have a very small battery inside in the bus. So while they're stopped and people getting in, getting out, the bus is being charged, and it doesn't need to charge while they drive. So this system has been featured in Times a few years ago, which we have been developed. And there's other many innovation we have been bringing in the engineering side. And many of our Korean leading company has been established by Korean the KAIST graduates. So NHN is the largest company in the internet in Korea. The founder came from KAIST. Nexon, the largest game company, also came from KAIST. ELK Semiconductor the company, and IDs. So many of them came from KAIST as the graduate established that company. So, and also the patent, international patent, we are the internationally 5th in ranking in producing the intellectual property. And about 449 venture company started by KAIST student in Korea, and $6.5 billion, and we created $5 billion and 16,000 jobs created, and many of company has been established from the KAIST in Korea. So this is the kind of brief instructions of KAIST, how we did it, how we are doing in some sense. So one of the things that I would like to share is that in the perspective of Uruguay economic growth, because one of my research areas is innovations, how developing country can catch up the developed country. And many researchers say that there are three ways, basically. The one is path following. The path following is like benchmarking what the advanced countries have done, doing the same thing. And the second is leapfrogging or catching up. So leapfrogging is like, well, you find a different track and leapfrog and go faster. And the third one is accelerated catch-up. You also, although benchmark, path follow, but you do faster than the previous countries. And to have this catching up to be possible, many people empirically and studied and researched, there should be a windows of opportunities. The windows opportunity means that here, like high frequency of innovations in the industry, and high fluidity of technological trajectory, and low testedness of knowledge. When those things are quite possible, then you can actually catch up, whether it is path following or accelerated catch up. But these things are, what's the characteristics of this industry? The industry with these characteristics are quite more of technology-based, like more sometimes IT, and these industries have higher opportunity for developing country to catch up. Very frequent in their innovations, and very changing and fluidity in their system. So these kind of things can give more opportunity for developing country to catch up in many ways. So in this perspective, the KAIST try to focus on to leverage this perspective. So we focus on this majorly IT and electrical engineering in many aspects. And especially these accelerations of catching up are largely based on the internationalization through linkage with the leading economy and universities, and leveraging the resources and observing the knowledge, and that actually make your institutions go faster. So I believe we are still trying to go faster, but UTEC and KAIST collaborations can give some of these new opportunity to link, and you can observe some of our KAIST knowledge and our kind of experience that actually accelerate the innovation of UTEC, and the UTEC also accelerate the innovation of the Uruguay, that might be quite valuable in some aspect, especially focusing on this observative capacity of nations. KAIST was the hearts of the observative capacity in Korea, and UTEC may be the hearts of the observative capacity of the advanced knowledge from the advanced country, including Korea, will be the major role, I think, in my perspective, of UTEC in Uruguay economy. And so this is what I have been explaining. And currently, KAIST still kind of leading the Korean educational paradigm. We are changing many different systems, and many of our universities in Korea are benchmarking KAIST to transform their systems, and leading in many aspects. So I already explained. And this 4 years of experience of KAIST, it will be quite valuable for UTEC establishment. So what are the key lessons of our organizations for UTEC? There are several things. The first one is strong political will of the government. I will explain in more detail one by one. The second is strong external support in early period of time, and high level of independence, and acquisition of highly talented faculty members, and acquisitions of highly talented students, and active interaction with industry, and unique cultural code. So these 7 factors are the key lessons of KAIST, and that is very important, I think, to other emerging organizations. Especially first, the political will, if I briefly explain. Our current president of Park Geun-hye, her father is Jung-hee Park, and he was the president in 1970s. And he was also the enthusiast for the science and technology. So his policy heavily focused on science and technology. So when the US government when he visited the United States, the President Johnson asked him, what kinds of help do you need? And the first thing he said is to establish the KAIST. So he asked the money to Johnson to donate the money to establish the KAIST institutions. So they donated from through the USAID, and they helped a lot. So from the start, our president helped KAIST very much. And USAID, they actually designed the blueprint of KAIST, and they donated $6 million. At the time, it's quite huge amount of money. And also the continued advice and evaluation of the performance of KAIST for quite a long time. So that actually helped a lot in many different ways. And relate with the strong political support. Because of the president's strong support, he even actually asked the Congress to create a new law only for KAIST. So if you enter the KAIST, unfortunately, the Korea is actually fighting against North Korea. Still, we are in the war, actually, literally speaking, although we are in a peace. So our young men between age 20 or 20, between 20 and 30, they all have to go to the military service for 2.5 years. It is required. There's no exemptions. But Park Chung-hee actually asked the Congress if a student, and at the time we only have a master and PhD, so if student goes to KAIST for master and PhD, they should be exempt in their military service. So we were the only one institutions the military service has been exempted from the starting point of our institution. So this has been giving a huge incentive for young people, very talented young people, come to KAIST and study further in science and engineering area. And also, so this is a special independent law for KAIST, and we have a very secured funding from the government, and also very independent from the Ministry of Education. So our universities, they kind of now we have 2 or 3 more university that is under the Ministry of Science and Technology. So we have been only one special institutions under Ministry of Science and Technology, not under the Ministry of Education. If you are under the Ministry of Education, you have to be one of them for hundreds of other universities. So we've been quite independently kind of developing our new strategy of growth in many different ways. Still we are. And very highly talented faculty member we recruited. At the time, even most of the university in 70s and 80s, like largest university had like only 1 or 2 PhD faculty members. But when we started, only the PhD faculty members can join as a faculty member at the time, from the early period of time. So it was very challenging, but many of our diaspora in the US and Europe with a PhD, they actually joined KAIST and became the leading faculty in our educational development. And also we had a very strong economic incentive to bring back US educated Korean scholars to Korea. Simply speaking, like the salary of the KAIST in 70s and 80s was triple the average salary of the other educational institutions. So it was also high incentive gave to those faculty members. So many of the good faculty entered KAIST. And also highly talented students, as I explained, they are all exempted in the military service, and they all receive living subsidies, and there's no tuitions to pay. And once you graduate KAIST, and many of the company, they want to hire the KAIST graduate. So that actually attracted many talented students in Korea, and that actually was a very important part of our institutional development. And also our original vision of KAIST is like to educate students specifically for Korean industry development at the time. So from the start, we focused on the industrial collaborations in very early period of times. Like the case of many South American developing countries, Korea also had a big university called Seoul National University, largest public institutions. They are also heavily focused on theory-based educations, not coupled with industry or technology and science. So that actually created a heavy problem in economic growth, because those educated human research should be the driving forces of industrial development, but they don't know about industry. They only know about theory. So it created like decoupling between education and industry. And this is kind of general problem, many issues of developing countries, not only in South America, but also in many of developing countries. So that also made me to advise some other country and help other countries like Dominican Republic to tightly link between education and industry. This is one of the key driving forces of economic growth in many developing countries, but not many countries can do that. And it is very fortunate that Uruguay can have this UTEC started and can link between this education and industry side. Then why not the existing university can do it? They cannot do it. Sorry, there's no president. He left actually. I can say that. But these existing big institutions, they're really hard to change their system, because they're all politically interactive, and they're all quite complex in their internal decisions. So change their system is almost impossible. To even change your curriculum, even change your program, it takes very long. It's just fight each other for their faculty members, and it's very, very rigid to change. So many times, establishing a new university actually changed the paradigm. It's like throwing a stone in the calm pond. So if UTEC is established, then other university will be affected. And they now try to change to compete against changing institutions. What actually KAIST has been done is similar like that. So when KAIST first established, this big national institution, national university called Seoul National University, they strongly protested to government, hey, you should fund that money to our university, not new university like KAIST. So there was strong protest, and they even meet the president to discourage this new kind of trials. But fortunately we studied, and after we studied, their institution has begun to change their system following the KAIST. So that kind of things like UTEC can happen in Uruguay, UTEC can make in Uruguay. So from the start, like one of the big changes that we changed in Korean educational system is that by starting to collaborate with the industry very closely in the educational system, this actually changed the educational paradigm of Korean side. So many other universities started to closely linked with the industry side in their science and technology educations. So many of our, from the early period of time, many of our departments started their educational system collaborating with the industry and company side. So many, like one word, our educational system is called industry project-based learning in many times. Those masters and PhDs, they actually do their research, which actually important project for Samsung or Hyundai or LG. So by doing that, they not only innovate a product in many things, but also after they graduate, eventually they enter into those companies and become a very core competitive human resources for the company. So there's a complementary between our KAIST and the companies. So this has been also the key attribute of KAIST. And so this shows how our, from the early period of time, how our private funding has been increasing in fairly large amount of money in that aspect. And the unique cultural code, beyond the limit, we are very, very strong in our research activities. And especially one of our code is that we very, very cherish our student. So most of our decision making is always centering on our student, whether it's really beneficial, whether it really promote their creativity or not. So that's the major decision making criteria of our organizations. And also the code of conduct for staff also centering on the faculty members. So many of our large institutions and public institutions of the issue is that it becomes bigger, it becomes like more of a public and government public based management that actually lag the change of the institutions. So one of the key attributes of KAIST is that we are very fast changing our systems and organizational structure and managing styles to respond to the changing paradigm of other external global environment. To do that, these staff members also to be very flexible, very supporting to faculty members. So that's also one of our key attributes of KAIST institutions. So, and then the cultural codes. So these 7 key lessons are quite, I hope, can be beneficial to UTEC in developing one of the really paradigm changing in Uruguayan educational system, and hope the UTEC can be also like KAIST, leading institutions in South America and also in the global market, educational market. And I hope KAIST experience and in coming few months hopefully can be very valuable for the UTEC. And although I have other things, more of like our industry and in university collaborations activities, but I think maybe you can just let me know. I'll just share the slides. But this is most of our presentations today. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.